I had been looking forward to our company anniversary for weeks. It wasn't just another milestone on the business calendar. It was a celebration I had poured my heart into planning, a testament to 25 years of our family's legacy, blood, sweat, and tears. I was Elena Moretti, co-founder and CEO of Moretti Fine Furnishings, the business my husband Marco and I had built from nothing but dreams and determination. That morning, I woke up with a flutter of excitement in my chest, anticipating the surprise gathering I'd arranged for the family at our flagship showroom later that evening. Little did I know that by sundown, I would make a decision that would change all our lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The gentle morning light filtered through the curtains as I stretched and reached for my phone, checking the time. It was barely 6 a.m., but I was already wide awake, mentally running through my checklist for the day. 25 years. A quarter of a century since Marco and I had opened that tiny workshop in his father's garage, crafting custom furniture pieces that eventually caught the eye of interior designers across the country. Now we had showrooms in 3 major cities, a staff of 47, and our children held prominent positions within the company. I glanced over at Marco's side of the bed, already empty. He was an early riser, always had been, typically heading to the office before dawn to get a jump on the day's tasks. That dedication had been one of the cornerstones of our success, but lately it felt like the business was consuming more and more of our family life, leaving little room for genuine connection. Still, today was special. 25 years of building something together deserved recognition, and I had spent weeks organizing an intimate celebration at our original showroom. I'd arranged for a catered dinner, champagne, and had even commissioned a beautiful commemorative plaque to honor the journey we'd taken together. Not just Marco and me, but our children too. Sophia, our marketing director, and Anthony, who headed operations. The anniversary celebration wasn't just about marking time, it was about remembering why we started, acknowledging our struggles, and recommitting to the vision that had sustained us through the hard years. At least, that's what it meant to me. I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to the kitchen, surprised to find it empty. Usually, Marco would leave a coffee cup in the sink or a note on the counter, some small evidence of his morning routine. Today, there was nothing. I brewed myself a cup and settled at the island, scrolling through my emails as I sipped the strong, bitter liquid. There were the usual updates from department heads, inquiries from potential clients, and a message from our accountant flagging some discrepancies in the quarterly reports that needed attention. Nothing unusual, except for one email that caught my eye. It was from Lawrence Barnes, the CEO of Pinnacle Furnishings, our largest competitor in the high-end market. Elena, I've given your proposal some thought. Let's meet to discuss terms. Lunch today? I frowned, rereading the message. I hadn't sent Lawrence any proposal. In fact, we'd barely spoken since a chance encounter at a trade show 3 months ago, where he'd made a passing comment about how challenging the market had become for family-owned businesses like ours. We'd exchanged pleasantries, nothing more. I typed a quick, polite response, assuming he'd confused me with someone else, and continued with my morning routine. By 8 a.m., I was dressed in my favorite charcoal gray pantsuit, a string of pearls at my neck, a gift from Marco on our 20th business anniversary, and was heading toward the garage when my phone chimed with a notification. It was a calendar reminder for a board meeting at 10 a.m. that I hadn't scheduled. Puzzled, I opened the calendar app to find several unfamiliar appointments blocked throughout the week, all entered under Marco's credentials. Normally, his assistant would coordinate with mine before adding anything to the shared company calendar, but these entries had bypassed that protocol. As I drove to the office, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. Small inconsistencies had been accumulating over the past few months. Marco's increasing secretiveness about certain accounts, his reluctance to discuss the company's 5-year plan, the way conversations about our retirement strategy seemed to evaporate whenever I brought them up. I'd brushed these concerns aside, attributing them to the stress of managing a growing business in an increasingly competitive market. But now, on the day that symbolized everything we'd built together, those little discrepancies began to align into a pattern I couldn't ignore. The office was already bustling when I arrived. Our headquarters occupied the top 2 floors of a renovated warehouse in the Arts District, all exposed brick and gleaming hardwood, showcasing our furniture in an environment that reflected its craftsmanship. Employees nodded and smiled as I made my way to my office, but I noticed an unusual tension in the air, a slight hesitation in their greetings. When I reached my office, my assistant Vanessa was already at her desk, looking slightly flustered as she juggled phone calls and emails. She glanced up when I entered, relief washing over her face. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, hanging up the phone. "I've been trying to make sense of the schedule changes, but no one seems to know what's going on. And Mr. Moretti has been in meetings all morning with people I don't recognize." "What people?" I asked, setting my bag down on my desk and booting up my computer. "3 men in suits arrived around 7. They've been in the conference room with him ever since. One of them is Lawrence Barnes." The mention of Lawrence's name sent a chill through me. What was Marco doing in a meeting with our biggest competitor without telling me? And on today, of all days? "Vanessa, can you pull up the latest financial reports for me? And any communications between Marco's office and Pinnacle Furnishings in the last 6 months?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She nodded, clearly relieved to have clear direction. "And what about the anniversary? Celebration tonight?" The caterers called to confirm the setup time. For a moment, I'd almost forgotten about the evening's plans. "Everything should proceed as scheduled. Has anyone from the family mentioned it to you today?" Vanessa looked confused. "No, nothing, but it's still early." I nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. If Marco was already at work with Lawrence Barnes, surely he remembered what day it was. And Sophia and Anthony must be busy with their own preparations for the evening. As Vanessa left to gather the files I'd requested, I opened my email again and found another message from Lawrence, sent just minutes ago. "Productive meeting with Marco. Looking forward to our lunch to finalize details." My hands trembled slightly. As I typed a response, "Lawrence, there seems to be some confusion. What exactly are you and Marco discussing?" His reply came almost immediately. "The acquisition, of course. Marco said you were on board with the sale. Are we not on the same page?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Sale? Marco was discussing selling our company without consulting me? The business we'd built together, poured our lives into, was suddenly on the negotiating table, and I was only learning about it through a competitor's casual email? I sat back in my chair, trying to process this betrayal. It wasn't just about the business decision, though that was shocking enough. It was about the complete disregard for our partnership, both professional and personal. 25 years of building something together, and he hadn't even bothered to discuss this with me. Before I could gather my thoughts, Vanessa returned with a thick folder of financial documents and a USB drive. "Here's everything I could find," she said, placing them on my desk. "But Elena, there's something else you should see." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. When I was looking through the shared drive, I found a folder of documents that were created recently but backdated, to make them appear older. Their board resolutions authorizing Marco to explore sale options without full board approval. My mouth went dry. "That's not possible. Those would need my signature as co-CEO." Vanessa nodded. "Your signature is there, but I've worked with you long enough to know it's not yours." The realization that Marco had potentially forged my signature on company documents was like a knife to the heart. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was potentially criminal. "Thank you, Vanessa," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside. I need some time to review these. Please hold my calls and reschedule any meetings for today. Once alone, I dove into the documents, following the paper trail of deception. What I found was devastating. For at least 6 months, Marco had been in talks with Pinnacle about a potential acquisition. He'd had the company secretly valued, discussed terms, and even drafted a transition plan that would see him join Pinnacle's board while our children would be offered modest roles in the new organization structure. Everything had been meticulously planned, except for my role. In the documents, I was essentially being sidelined, offered a consulting position that would phase out within a year. The betrayal was complete. Not only had Marco kept me in the dark about selling our life's work, but he deliberately excluded me from the future he was planning. And on our anniversary, of all days. As I sat there, surrounded by evidence of my husband's duplicity, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Mom, sorry can't make dinner tonight. Big presentation tomorrow, need to prep. Rain check?" Moments later, another text, this time from Anthony. "Got dragged into last minute? Meetings all day. Don't wait up." And finally, Marco. "Working late. Don't hold dinner. Important client meeting." Not one of them remembered. Not one of them had acknowledged the significance of today. The anniversary celebration I'd spent weeks planning, the milestone that marked our family's greatest achievement, had completely slipped their minds. Or worse, they remembered but didn't care enough to prioritize it. Something inside me hardened in that moment. The hurt crystallized into resolve. If my family could so easily forget what we'd built together, if Marco could secretly plot to sell our company without my input, then perhaps it was time for me to take control of the narrative. I picked up my phone and dialed Lawrence Barnes's number. "Elena," he answered, surprise evident in his voice. "I was just about to call you. There seems to be some confusion about—" "No confusion, Lawrence," I interrupted, my voice cool and professional. "I understand you're interested in acquiring Moretti Fine Furnishings, but I think you're negotiating with the wrong person." There was a pause on the other end. "I'm not sure I follow." "Marco doesn't have unilateral authority to sell the company. As co-founder and equal shareholder, any sale would require my approval, and I'm prepared to offer you a much more straightforward deal, without all the complications Marco has introduced." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. And what exactly are you proposing?" "Lunch, as you suggested. 1 hour, just you and me. I'll bring the real numbers, not the manipulated ones Marco has been showing you, and we can discuss what a genuine acquisition would look like, one that respects the legacy of what I've built." "What you've built," Lawrence repeated, confusion evident in his tone. "Yes," I replied firmly. "What I've built. Marco may have been the face of Moretti Fine Furnishings, but I've been its heart and soul. It's time everyone remembered that." We agreed to meet at a quiet restaurant downtown, away from prying eyes and office gossip. As I hung up, I felt a curious sense of calm. The shock and hurt were still there, but they'd been channeled into something more productive. Determination. I spent the next hour combing through company records, gathering documentation that proved my equal ownership, and preparing a counterproposal that would secure my future and legacy, regardless of what happened to the business. By the time I left for my lunch meeting with Lawrence, I had a clear plan. The restaurant was dimly lit, offering privacy and discretion. Lawrence was already seated when I arrived, looking slightly uncomfortable as he rose to greet me. "Elena," he said, extending his hand. "I have to admit this is not how I expected today to unfold." I offered a tight smile as I took my seat. "That makes 2 of us, Lawrence. Now shall we get down to business?" Over the next hour, I laid out my terms. Yes, I was willing to sell Moretti Fine Furnishings, but on my conditions, not Marco's. I wanted a fair valuation that reflected the true worth of our brand and craftsmanship. I wanted guarantees for our long-term employees. And I wanted a role for myself that honored my contributions and expertise. What I didn't want was for Marco to benefit from the duplicity he'd orchestrated. "This is quite different from what Marco proposed," Lawrence said cautiously after I'd finished. "He gave me the impression that you were ready to step back from the business entirely." "Did he?" I said, my voice sharp with bitterness. "Well, he was. Mistaken. About many things, it seems." Lawrence studied me for a moment, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "I always wondered why he seemed so eager to minimize your involvement. Now I understand. He knew you'd drive a harder bargain." "Is that a problem?" I challenged. He smiled, a genuine smile this time. "Not at all. In fact, I prefer negotiating with someone who knows their worth." Marco's offer felt too good to be true, and in my experience, those deals usually are. By the time dessert arrived, we had the outlines of an agreement that satisfied us both. Lawrence would acquire Moretti Fine Furnishings for a sum significantly higher than what Marco had been discussing. The company name and legacy would be preserved. I would join Pinnacle's executive board with real authority and a 5-year contract. And most importantly, the deal would be structured to ensure that my contribution to the company was properly recognized and rewarded. "One more thing," I said as we prepared to leave. "I want this finalized by the end of the week, before Marco can cause any more damage." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious. These things usually take months." "I have faith in your legal team," I replied, "and I'm prepared to work around the clock to make it happen." He nodded slowly. "May I ask why the rush?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because today is the 25th anniversary of Moretti Fine Furnishings, a milestone my entire family has forgotten, and I've decided it will also mark the beginning of my new chapter, one where I'm no longer taken for granted." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Well then," he said, raising his water glass in a subtle toast, "to new beginnings, Elena, and to remembering what truly matters." As I drove back to the office, a strange mix of emotions swirled within me. There was still hurt, deep and raw, at the multiple betrayals, Marco's secretive dealings, my children's casual dismissal of a day that meant so much to me, the years of having my contributions minimized and overlooked. But there was also a growing sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to someone else's decisions. I was making my own. When I reached the office, I found several missed calls from Marco on my phone. He'd obviously spoken to Lawrence and discovered that I knew about his plans. I ignored them all, focusing instead on gathering the additional documentation I would need for the accelerated sale process. My assistant's expression when I returned told me that word was starting to spread. "Is it true?" Vanessa asked, her voice hushed. "Are we being sold to Pinnacle?" I nodded, seeing no reason to hide it now. "Yes, but not in the way Marco planned. I've negotiated terms that will protect the company's legacy and our employees' futures. Nothing will change in the immediate term." Relief flooded her face. "I was worried when I heard rumors about Marco's deal. It sounded like most of us would be let go." That was news to me, but not surprising given what I'd learned about Marco's priorities. "That won't happen," I assured her. "I won't let it." I spent the remainder of the afternoon in my office, door closed, fielding calls from our lawyers and preparing for the storm I knew was coming. It arrived just after 5, in the form of Marco bursting into my office, face flushed with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, not bothering to close the door behind him. "Lawrence just called to cancel our meeting tomorrow, said he's working directly with you now. Have you lost your mind?" I looked up from my computer, strangely calm in the face of his fury. "Hello, Marco. No, I haven't lost my mind. I've simply decided to take control of a situation you created by going behind my back." "Behind your—" he sputtered, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "I was trying to secure our future. This market is killing companies like ours. Pinnacle's offer is our best chance to get out while we still have value. And you didn't think I deserved to be part of that decision? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You didn't think your co-founder, your wife, should be consulted before you started selling off our life's work? He had the grace to look slightly abashed, but only for a moment. I knew you'd be emotional about it. You're too attached to this place, Elena. You can't see the business realities. The business realities, I repeated, anger finally seeping into my tone. Like the reality that you forged my signature on board resolutions? Or the reality that you were planning to push me out while securing yourself a cushy board position? Those realities, Marco? His face paled slightly. You're twisting things. I was going to tell you once the preliminary terms were set. I was protecting you from the stress of negotiations. Protecting me, I echoed, standing up now, hands flat on my desk. The way you protected me by forgetting what today is? By making plans that didn't include me? By treating me like I'm some fragile ornament rather than your equal partner? Confusion flickered across his face. Today? What's special about today? And there it was, the final confirmation that he had truly forgotten. 25 years of building our company together, and he couldn't even remember the anniversary. Get out of my office, Marco, I said, my voice suddenly tired. I have work to do. Elena, you can't seriously be considering Lawrence's offer without me. Whatever he's told you is probably more honest than anything you've told me lately, I finished for him. The deal is moving forward, Marco. My way, not yours, and there's nothing you can do about it. His face darkened with anger again. We'll see about that. I still own half this company. And I own the other half, I reminded him. Plus, I have documentation of your unauthorized actions, including forgery. How do you think that will play out in court? Or in the press? Co-founder attempts to sell family business behind wife's back. Not exactly the legacy you've been so concerned about preserving. For a moment, he looked genuinely shocked, as if he couldn't believe I would stand up to him this way. We stared at each other across the desk. Two people who had once shared a dream now facing each other as adversaries. You wouldn't, he finally said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. I already have, I replied. The papers are being drawn up as we speak. Lawrence and I have reached an agreement in principle, one that values this company appropriately and respects the contributions of everyone who built it, not just you. Marco opened his mouth to argue further, but was interrupted by a knock at the door. Sophia stood there looking confused and slightly alarmed. What's going on? She asked, glancing between us. The whole office is buzzing with rumors about a sale, and now you two are shouting at each other? I turned to my daughter, seeing in her face the echo of the eager young woman who had joined the company straight out of business school, full of ideas and enthusiasm. Somewhere along the way, she'd become as caught up in Marco's vision as he was, forgetting the values that had made our company special in the first place. Your father has been secretly negotiating to sell our company to Pinnacle, I explained calmly. Without consulting me or the board. When I found out, I took matters into my own hands and made a better deal. One that will actually preserve what we've built, not dismantle it. Sophia's eyes widened as she turned to Marco. Dad, is this true? He shifted uncomfortably. It's more complicated than that. I was exploring options, that's all, for all our benefit. By forging Mom's signature? Sophia asked, clearly having heard the earlier part of our conversation. How is that for our benefit? The look of betrayal on her face mirrored what I'd felt earlier, and for a moment, I felt a flash of sympathy for Marco. But then, I remembered his casual dismissal of today's significance, his text canceling the celebration I'd planned, and the hardness returned to my heart. We should discuss this as a family, Marco said, his tone conciliatory now. Anthony should be here too. We can have dinner tonight and talk through everything. Sophia shook her head. Anthony's not even in town. He flew to Chicago this morning for meetings with the Lakeside project. Didn't he tell you? The irony wasn't lost on me. Even now, our family's communication was fractured, everyone operating in their own orbit without coordination or consideration. There's nothing to discuss, I said firmly. The decision has been made. I've negotiated terms that will benefit everyone, including both of you. Your positions are secure, the company name continues, and our legacy remains intact. The only thing that changes is that I will finally get the recognition I deserve for my role in building this business. Marco's face hardened again. This isn't over, Elena. You can't just make unilateral decisions like this. Why not? I challenged. You did. As he stormed out of my office, I felt a curious lightness. The confrontation I'd dreaded was over, and I had stood my ground. For too long, I'd allowed Marco to dominate our business decisions, to take credit for our shared success, to treat me as a supportive wife rather than an equal partner. That ended today. Sophia lingered in the doorway, her expression troubled. Mom, what's really going on? This isn't like you. I sighed, gesturing for her to come in and close the door. What's going on is that I woke up this morning excited about celebrating a milestone with my family, only to discover that not only had everyone forgotten what today means, but your father has been plotting behind my back to sell our company, without me. Her brow furrowed. What milestone? What's today? And there it was again, that same casual dismissal, that same forgetfulness. From my own daughter, who had grown up watching us build this business, who had heard the stories of our early struggles and triumphs. Today is the 25th anniversary of Moretti Fine Furnishings, I said quietly. 25 years since. Your father and I opened our first workshop with nothing but hope and determination. I had planned a celebration at the original showroom tonight, invited the whole family, spent weeks arranging it, and not one of you remembered. Realization dawned on her face, followed quickly by guilt. Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry, I completely forgot. With the quarter ending and the new line launching, it just slipped my mind. It slipped everyone's mind, I said, the hurt evident in my voice despite my efforts to remain composed. And that's the problem, Sophia. This company has become just a business to all of you. You've forgotten what it really is. Our family's heart and soul, our legacy, the result of years of sacrifice and hard work. Sophia took a step toward me, her expression softening. We can still celebrate. I'll cancel my plans for tonight. We can call Anthony, have him come back early. We'll make it work. I shook my head. It's too late for that. The moment has passed. And honestly, a last-minute obligatory dinner isn't what I wanted anyway. I wanted genuine recognition of what we've achieved together. What I've achieved, despite often being overlooked. Mom, no one overlooks your contributions, Sophia protested, but even she didn't sound convinced. Don't they? I asked. When was the last time you saw my name mentioned in a press release about the company? When did you last hear your father acknowledge my role in our success publicly? How many times have you yourself referred to Dad's company when talking to clients? Or friends? She had no answer for that, and I saw in her silence the recognition of a truth she'd never considered before. I'm not doing this out of spite or anger, I continued, my voice gentler now. I'm doing it because it's time for me to claim my place, to ensure that my contributions are valued and recognized. The deal I've made with Lawrence guarantees that. Sophia sank into a chair across from my desk, looking suddenly young and uncertain. But what about us? What happens to the family? It was a question I'd been asking myself all day. What did happen to a family when the foundations it was built on proved to be unstable? When assumptions about roles and respect were suddenly challenged? That depends on all of you, I answered honestly. On whether you can see me as more than just Marco's wife or your mother. on whether you're willing to acknowledge that I've been an equal partner in building everything we have. We talked for a while longer, Sophia asking questions about the deal, about my intentions, about what would change. I answered as honestly as I could, though many details were still being worked out. By the time she left my office, there was a new understanding between us. Not approval, necessarily, but a recognition that I was acting from a place of genuine hurt and legitimate grievance. As the office emptied for the day, I remained at my desk, reviewing documents and responding to emails from our lawyers. The celebration I'd planned for tonight had been canceled, the caterers informed, the champagne unordered. Instead of marking our anniversary surrounded by family, I was alone with the knowledge that everything was about to change. Yet despite the sadness and hurt, there was also a growing sense of anticipation. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was taking control of my own narrative. I was demanding the respect and recognition I deserved, and I was discovering a strength in myself that had been dormant for too long. My phone buzzed with a text from Marco. "We need to talk. Please come home." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing my response. "I'm busy securing our future. We can talk tomorrow." Then I silenced my phone, gathered my things, and headed not home, but to a hotel downtown. I needed space to think, to plan, to prepare for the days ahead. This wasn't just about selling a business anymore. It was about reclaiming my identity, my voice, and my power. As I drove through the darkening city streets, I passed the original showroom where our company had first found success. The building where, 25 years ago today, Marco and I had stood together, filled with pride and hope for the future we would build. I slowed as I approached, remembering the excitement of those early days, the sense of partnership that had fueled our success. For a moment I considered stopping, walking through those familiar doors one last time, remembering what it had felt like to be truly equal, truly valued. But I drove on. That chapter was closing now. It was time to write a new one. The hotel room felt like a sanctuary, a neutral space where I could think clearly without the weight of shared memories pressing down on me. I ordered room service and spread the company documents across the king-sized bed, methodically reviewing each one as I ate a meal I barely tasted. Every page revealed another layer of Marco's deception, financial projections that minimized my contributions, transition plans that gradually phased out my role, valuations that underestimated what we'd built. By midnight, my anger had crystallized into something colder, more focused. This wasn't just about an anniversary forgotten or a husband's betrayal. This was about years of being subtly diminished, of watching my vision and hard work be attributed to others, of standing in the shadow of a man who had come to believe his own mythology. My phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the evening. Calls from Marco, texts from Sophia, even a confused message from Anthony, who had apparently been summoned back from Chicago by his father. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the emails from Lawrence's legal team outlining next steps for the acquisition. Sleep came fitfully. Dream fragments of boardrooms and arguments waking me every few hours. By dawn, I was already up, standing at the window watching the city slowly come to life. 24 hours ago, I had been a different woman, hopeful, trusting, willing, to celebrate others while minimizing my own needs. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone more determined, more clear-eyed about her worth. I showered, dressed in my most powerful suit, a tailored navy ensemble that I'd worn to our biggest client pitches, and headed to a breakfast meeting with Lawrence and his chief counsel. We'd arranged to meet at a private club downtown, away from curious eyes and potential interruptions. Lawrence rose as I approached the table, his expression one of cautious respect. "Elena, how are you holding up?" "I'm focused," I replied, taking my seat and accepting the coffee a waiter immediately poured. "Let's get to work." For the next 2 hours, we hammered out details of the acquisition, timelines, valuations, transition plans. Lawrence's team had worked through the night to prepare a draft agreement that reflected our discussion from the previous day. It was a solid foundation, though there were still points I wanted to clarify and strengthen. The employee retention guarantees need to be ironclad, I insisted, tapping the relevant section of the document. These people have been loyal to Moretti. I won't have them treated as disposable. Lawrence nodded, making notes. We can extend the guarantee period to 3 years instead of 2, and add specific language about maintaining current benefits and advancement opportunities. Good, I said. And the creative control provisions need to be more specific. I want final approval on any changes to our signature design elements or manufacturing standards. As we worked, I could feel Lawrence reassessing me with each precise demand and thoughtful question. Whatever Marco had told him about me, whatever dismissive characterization he'd offered of his wife, the co-founder, was clearly being revised in real time. You know, Lawrence said during a brief break while his legal team revised some language, Marco always positioned himself as the visionary, and you as the supporting player. I'm beginning to think he had that backwards. I smiled thinly. Marco has always been excellent at crafting narratives that suit his purposes. Unfortunately, he started believing them himself. By 10 o'clock, we had a revised agreement that satisfied my core requirements. The deal would value Moretti fine, Furnishings at $42 million, nearly double what Marco had apparently been willing to accept. It would preserve our brand identity, protect our employees, and give me a meaningful role in the combined company going forward. I'll need 24 hours to review this with my personal attorney, I told Lawrence as we prepared to part ways. Assuming no major issues, we should be able to sign preliminary papers by tomorrow afternoon. He nodded, looking slightly bemused. I've never seen a deal of this size move so quickly. Are you certain you don't want to take more time? I'm certain, I replied firmly. The longer this drags on, the more opportunity for Marco to interfere or create problems. Clean and quick is better for everyone. As I left the club, I checked my phone for the first time since the previous evening. 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, 5 voicemails, the digital evidence of a family in chaos. I scrolled through the texts briefly. Marco. Where are you? We need to talk about this. You're making a terrible mistake. Sophia. Mom, please call me. Dad is beside himself. We can work this out as a family. Anthony. What the hell is going on? Dad called me home for an emergency and now everyone's talking about selling the company? Call me ASAP. I put the phone away without responding. They would have to wait. I had another meeting to attend first. The offices of Jameson and Barrett occupied the 30th floor of a gleaming downtown tower. Rebecca Barrett had been my personal attorney for years, handling my non-business legal matters separate from the company's counsel. She was sharp, discreet, and utterly unintimidated by powerful men. Exactly what I needed right now. You've been busy, she said after I'd outlined the situation and handed her the draft agreement. Selling a company and reclaiming your professional identity all in 24 hours. Impressive. Necessary, I corrected. Once I realized what Marco was planning, I had to move quickly. She nodded, already scanning the document with practiced efficiency. Smart move coming to me rather than using company counsel. They'd have been conflicted, especially given Marco's position. That's why I've always kept you in my corner, I said. I need someone whose only loyalty is to me. Rebecca looked up, her expression serious. And have you thought about the personal implications of this? Not just professionally, but your marriage? It was a question I'd been avoiding, focusing instead on the business aspects of the situation. But it couldn't be ignored forever. One betrayal at a time, I said quietly. Right now, I'm dealing with the professional one. The personal, that will come later. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Fair enough. Let's make sure this agreement protects you completely then, both as a businesswoman and as an individual. For the next several hours, Rebecca and I went through the document line by line, strengthening language, closing potential loopholes, ensuring that my interests were fully protected. By mid-afternoon, she had compiled a list of revisions to send back to Lawrence's team. These changes don't alter the fundamental structure of the deal, she assured me, but they do provide you with additional safeguards and clarify your role. Going forward, Lawrence shouldn't have any objections if he's negotiating in good faith. As I prepared to leave her office, Rebecca placed a hand on my arm. Elena, I've known you for what? 15 years now? I've never seen you like this. So decisive, so unbending. It suits you. I smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude for her support. I've spent too many years bending. It's time I stood straight. My next stop was inevitable, though I'd been postponing it as long as possible. I needed to return to the office to face the questions and confusion my actions had created. As I drove, I steeled myself for the confrontations ahead, rehearsing responses and reminding myself why I was doing this. The mood in the office was palpably tense when I arrived. Conversations hushed as I walked past, eyes following me with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Vanessa intercepted me before I reached my office, her expression anxious. Mr. Moretti has been looking for you all morning, she said in a low voice. He's called 3 times in the last hour alone, and there's a board meeting scheduled for 4 o'clock. Emergency session. I checked my watch. 3:30. Perfect timing. Thank you, Vanessa. Please gather the latest quarterly reports and the transition documents we've been working on. I'll need them for the meeting. She nodded, hesitating before adding, Everyone's talking about the sale. People are worried about their jobs. Their concerns are understandable but unnecessary, I assured her. Job security was my first priority in the negotiations. No one is losing their position because of this deal. Relief flooded her face. I'll let the team know. That will help calm some fears. As I settled at my desk, I took a moment to center myself. The board meeting would be challenging. Marco had likely spent the day rallying support, trying to build a coalition to block my actions. But I knew our board members well. Their concerns, their priorities, their individual relationships with Marco and me. I was prepared. At precisely 4 o'clock, I walked into the boardroom, head high, expression composed. The tension in the air was thick enough to touch. Marco sat at the head of the table, looking haggard and angry. Sophia and Anthony flanked, him, both wearing expressions of confusion and concern. The other board members, 2 investors from our early days and our longtime CFO, sat in uncomfortable silence. Elena, Marco said as I took my seat directly opposite him. So glad. You could join us. I was beginning to think you'd disappeared entirely. I met his gaze steadily. I've been working, Marco, securing our company's future. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Is that what you call going behind my back to negotiate with our biggest competitor? Throwing away 25 years of independence? Independence? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. That's an interesting choice of words from someone who was secretly planning to sell this company without consulting his co-founder and wife. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. This was clearly not what they had expected. Perhaps, our CFO, James, interjected cautiously, one of you could explain exactly what's happening? We've heard rumors, but nothing concrete. I nodded, appreciating the opportunity to set the narrative. Yesterday, I discovered that Marco has been in negotiations with Pinnacle Furnishings to sell Moretti. These discussions have been ongoing for months, without board approval or my knowledge. When I confronted Lawrence Barnes about it, he was surprised to learn I hadn't been involved in the decision. All eyes turned to Marco, who flushed with anger. I was exploring options, In a preliminary way. Nothing had been decided. You forged my signature on board resolutions, I countered calmly. You drafted transition plans that effectively eliminated my role while securing yourself a position on Pinnacle's board. Those don't sound like preliminary explorations to me. Gasps came from around the table. Sophia covered her mouth in shock, while Anthony's face darkened with anger. Dad, is that true? He demanded. You forged Mom's signature? Marco sputtered, clearly caught off guard by the direct accusation. It wasn't. That's not. I was going to bring everyone in once the initial framework was established. After the fact, I pointed out, when the major decisions had already been made, without input from your co-founder or the board. James leaned forward, his expression grave. Marco, if what Elena is saying is accurate, this represents a serious breach of fiduciary duty, potentially even fraud. It's more complicated than she's making it sound, Marco insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. The market is changing. We're facing increased competition, rising costs. A strategic partnership with Pinnacle makes sense. I don't disagree, I said, surprising everyone, including Marco. In fact, I've negotiated terms with Lawrence that are far more favorable than what you were discussing. Terms that value this company appropriately and protect what we've built. I distributed copies of the revised agreement that Rebecca and I had finalized. This offer values Moretti at $42 million, nearly double what Marco was willing to accept. It guarantees job security for all employees for a minimum of 3 years. It preserves our brand identity and craftsmanship standards. And it provides meaningful roles for those who wish to continue with the combined company. The board members began flipping through the documents, expressions of surprise and interest replacing their earlier confusion. You did all this in one day? One of our investors asked, clearly impressed. When necessary, I can work quite efficiently, I replied, allowing myself a small smile. Marco slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. You had no authority to negotiate this deal. I had exactly as much authority as you did, I countered. I'm co-CEO and equal shareholder. The difference is that I'm being transparent about my actions and bringing the results to the board for proper consideration. Our CFO was already deep in the financial sections of the agreement, his practiced eye assessing the numbers. These terms are remarkably favorable, he admitted. The valuation alone is well above market standard for our industry. Because I didn't undersell us, I said pointedly. I know what we're worth. Anthony, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Why didn't you tell us what was happening, Dad? Why all the secrecy? Marco ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every gesture. I was trying to protect the company, to secure our legacy before things got worse. The market is changing, competition is increasing. I wanted to get ahead of it. By cutting me out, I added. By diminishing my role and contributions. That's not fair, he protested, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. Isn't it? I challenged. The transition plan you drafted gave you a board seat at Pinnacle while relegating me to a temporary consulting position. You were literally writing me out of the company's future. Sophia gasped softly. Dad, you didn't. His silence was confirmation enough. The question before us now, I continued, addressing the full board, is whether to proceed with the acquisition under the terms I've negotiated. Lawrence is prepared to move forward immediately, but final approval rests with this board. James looked up from the papers. We would need time to review these terms thoroughly. This is a major decision that affects everyone associated with Moretti. Of course, I agreed, but I would ask that you consider it expeditiously. The offer is time-sensitive and delays create unnecessary risk. Marco leaned forward, his expression desperate. You can't seriously be considering this. Elena is acting out of spite, not business sense. One of our investors, Barbara, who had remained silent until now, fixed Marco with a cool stare. Actually, Marco, based on what I'm seeing here, Elena is acting like the savvy businesswoman she's always been. These terms are exceptional. It's not about the terms, Marco exploded. It's about how this was done, behind my back, without proper process. The irony of his complaint wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Anthony actually gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You mean exactly like what you were doing to Mom? He asked. Come on, Dad. You can't have it both ways. Marco looked around the table, seeking support and finding none. Even Sophia, who had always been closer to her father than to me, was looking at him with new, more critical eyes. I propose we take 48 hours to review the agreement thoroughly, James suggested, then reconvene for a vote. In the meantime, neither Marco nor Elena should take any further unilateral actions regarding the potential sale. The proposal was reasonable, and the board quickly agreed. As the meeting adjourned, people filed out silently, the weight of revelations and divided loyalties hanging heavy in the air. Marco remained seated, staring at the table as the room emptied. I gathered my papers, preparing to leave, when he finally spoke. Why are you doing this, Elena? He asked, his voice quieter now, almost defeated. Is it really worth destroying everything we've built together? I paused, considering his question. I'm not destroying anything, Marco. I'm saving what can be saved on terms that respect everyone's contributions, including mine. This isn't about the company, he insisted. This is about us, isn't it? About our marriage. I met his gaze directly. It's about both. About years of being undervalued, overlooked, taken for granted. About watching you claim credit for our shared vision and hard work. About discovering that when it came time to plan for the future, you were willing to discard me without a second thought. He flinched at my words. That's not fair. I've always acknowledged your contributions. Have you? I challenged. When was the last time you publicly recognized my role in building this company? When did you last introduce me as your co-founder rather than your wife? How many interviews have you given where I replaced we in the story of Moretti's creation? His silence was damning. And then yesterday, on the day that should have celebrated our shared achievement, you not only forgot its significance, but revealed that you'd been plotting to sell our life's work without me. The anniversary, he murmured, realization, finally dawning. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're punishing me for forgetting. I shook my head, disappointment washing over me. No, Marco. I'm finally standing up for myself after years of stepping back to let you shine. The forgotten anniversary was just the final evidence that you no longer see me as your partner, in business or in life. I gathered my belongings and walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. The board will make its decision in 48 hours. I suggest you use that time to reflect on how we got here, and what role your own actions played in bringing us to this point. As I walked out, leaving him alone in the boardroom that had witnessed so many of our triumphs and disagreements over the years, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and liberation. Something fundamental had shifted between us, something that perhaps could never be repaired. But I was no longer the woman who would sacrifice her own worth to maintain a flawed partnership. The next 2 days passed in a blur of meetings, calls, and preparations. I worked closely with Lawrence's team to address the questions and concerns raised by our board. I met individually with key employees to reassure them about their futures under the new structure. I consulted with Rebecca about the personal financial implications of the sale, ensuring my interests were protected regardless of what happened with my marriage. Marco made several attempts to speak with me privately, each more urgent than the last, but I maintained my distance. This wasn't the time for emotional conversations or manipulative appeals. The business decision needed to be made clearly and rationally without the complications of our personal relationship clouding the issue. Sophia and Anthony both reached out as well, their initial shock giving way to more nuanced reactions. Anthony, always the pragmatist, seemed almost impressed by my decisive action once he understood the full context. Sophia remained torn, her loyalty to her father conflicting with her growing recognition of the justice in my position. "I had no idea, Mom," she told me during a brief conversation in my office, "about any of it. Dad's secret negotiations, the way he was positioning you in the transition plan, even how much he's been taking credit for your work over the years. I just always assumed." "That's the problem," I said gently. "Everyone just always assumed that Marco was the driving force and I was the supportive wife, including, eventually, Marco himself." She nodded slowly, a new understanding in her eyes. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry I forgot the anniversary. It should have been important to all of us." The apology was sincere, and I accepted it with a nod. It's not too late for us to create new traditions, new ways of honoring what this family has built together. But it has to be based on truth and mutual respect, not convenient fictions. As the 48-hour mark approached, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever the board decided, I had already won the most important battle. I had reclaimed my voice, my power, my sense of self-worth. I was no longer living in Marco's shadow, accepting the scraps of recognition he occasionally tossed my way. I had stepped into the light, demanding to be seen and valued for who I truly was. The day of the vote dawned clear and bright, a perfect early autumn morning. I dressed with particular care, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident and strong, a tailored crimson dress that I'd always loved, but Marco had once dismissively called too bold for business meetings. Today felt like exactly the right occasion for boldness. As I drove to the office for the final board meeting, I reflected on the journey of the past few days. From the hurt and betrayal of discovering Marco's deception, to the empowerment of taking control, to the clarity that had come from finally demanding the respect I deserved. It hadn't been easy, and there would be more challenges ahead, but I knew now that I had the strength to face them. The future of the company, of my family, of my marriage, remained uncertain. But for the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was approaching that uncertainty not with fear or resignation, but with confidence and determination. Whatever happened next, it would be on my terms, shaped by my voice and my values. And in that knowledge, I found a kind of freedom I hadn't even realized I was missing. The boardroom was silent as I entered, the tension palpable as all eyes turned to me. I took my seat opposite Marco, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the slump of his shoulders. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy, but I quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't the time for wavering. James called the meeting to order, his tone formal and serious. "We've all had 48 hours to review the acquisition proposal negotiated by Elena with Pinnacle Furnishings. We've consulted with independent financial advisors who have confirmed the valuation is significantly above market average. The terms protecting employee positions and our brand identity are robust. Now, we must decide whether to proceed." Barbara, our most experienced investor, nodded. "I've been involved with numerous acquisitions over my career, and I have to say, these terms are exceptional. Lawrence Barnes is paying a premium, which suggests he values Moretti's reputation and market position highly. Or perhaps he values the opportunity to eliminate a competitor," Marco countered, his voice tight. "Once they have control, what's to stop them from dismantling everything we've built?" "The legally binding provisions I negotiated," I replied calmly, "which you would know if you'd bothered to read the agreement thoroughly instead of just reacting to my involvement." Anthony cleared his throat. "I've gone through every line of this deal, and Mom's right. The protections are substantial. Our employees are secure, our manufacturing standards preserved, our brand identity maintained. Financially, it's more than fair. It's generous." Marco looked at his son with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. "You're supporting this? After everything I've taught you about independence, about building something that lasts?" "I'm supporting a good business decision," Anthony replied steadily. "And more importantly, I'm supporting transparency and honesty in leadership, values you always claimed were essential to our company culture." The barb landed visibly, Marco flinching as if he'd been struck. He turned to Sophia, perhaps his last hope for an ally. "Sophia, you understand what's at stake here, don't you?" My daughter met his gaze, her expression troubled, but resolved. "I understand that you've put us all in an impossible position, Dad. If what you were doing was right, why did you have to hide it? Why forge Mom's signature? Why create transition plans that pushed her out?" Marco had no answer, at least none, he was willing to voice in front of the board. He simply stared down at his hands, defeat gradually settling over his features. James sighed, glancing around the table. "Unless there are further points to discuss, I believe we're ready to vote on whether to accept the acquisition offer as negotiated by Elena." One by one, the board members cast their votes. Barbara, "Yes." James, "Yes." Anthony, "Yes." Sophia, after a moment's hesitation, "Yes." When it came to Marco, he simply shook his head, refusing to participate, a final, futile protest. My vote was the last, though by then it was merely a formality. "Yes," I said clearly, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "It's time for Moretti Fine Furnishings to begin its next chapter." "Then it's settled," James announced. "The board approves the acquisition offer. I'll instruct our attorneys to proceed with the necessary paperwork. Elena, as you've been the primary negotiator, would you like to be the one to inform Lawrence?" I nodded, a sense of finality washing over me. "I'll call him immediately after we adjourn." As the meeting broke up, people gathered their things in silence, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Marco remained seated, staring at nothing as the others filed out. I lingered, feeling that something needed to be said between us, some acknowledgement of the seismic shift that had just occurred. When we were alone, he finally looked up at me, his expression a complex mixture of anger, defeat, and something that might have been grudging respect. "Congratulations," he said, his voice hollow. "You've won." I shook my head. "This isn't about winning or losing, Marco. It's about doing what's right for the company, for our employees, and for myself." "Right for yourself, certainly," he replied bitterly. "You've made sure of that. The board seat, the expanded role, the recognition you've always craved." "The recognition I've earned," I corrected. "And yes, I've secured my future, just as you tried to secure yours. The difference is I did it openly and honestly." He laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Is that what you tell yourself? That this was about honesty, not revenge for a forgotten anniversary?" I sighed, realizing that even now he didn't truly understand. The anniversary was just the final straw. Marco. The moment when I realized how completely you had come to take me for granted, both professionally and personally. This was about refusing to be invisible any longer, about claiming my place after years of standing in your shadow. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "What happens now? To us, I mean." It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one that went beyond business decisions and corporate futures. What did happen to a marriage of 30 years when the foundation of trust had been so thoroughly shattered? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "That depends on whether you can truly see what's happened here. Not just my actions, but yours. Whether you can understand why I had to do this." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not sure I can. Not yet, anyway." "Then we have our answer, at least for now," I said, gathering my papers. I'll be staying at the hotel until the acquisition is finalized. After that, we'll see. As I walked out of the boardroom, leaving Marco alone with his thoughts, I felt lighter than I had in years. The decision was made. The die cast. Whatever came next, I would face it not as Marco's wife, or as the silent partner in our business, but as Elena Moretti, a woman who had finally claimed her full value and voice. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as the acquisition moved forward. Lawrence and his team worked efficiently, respecting the timeline we'd established and addressing any issues that arose with remarkable flexibility. It was clear. He valued the deal and wanted to ensure a smooth transition. I threw myself into the process, working closely with our department heads to prepare them for the changes ahead. I met with employees at all levels, from showroom staff to craftspeople in our workshops, addressing their concerns directly and honestly. Many were initially anxious about the sale, but as they understood the protections I'd negotiated and saw my continued involvement, their fears began to ease. "You're different now," Vanessa observed one afternoon as we worked late preparing transition documents. "More. I don't know. Present somehow. Like you're fully here in a way you weren't before." I looked up, surprised by her perception. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, perhaps worried she'd overstepped. "It's just, for years, you've been this steady, quiet force, competent, kind, but always somewhat in the background. Now it's like you've stepped into the spotlight, and it suits you. You're more direct, more confident." Her observation made me pause. Was that how others had seen me? As a capable but ultimately secondary figure? Had I unconsciously reinforced that perception by deferring to Marco, by accepting his more prominent role without question? "I suppose I am different," I acknowledged. "I've realized that staying quiet doesn't serve anyone, not the company, not our employees, and certainly not myself." Vanessa smiled. "Well, whatever caused the change, it's inspiring. Especially for some of the younger women here who've always admired you." The idea that others might find inspiration in my journey hadn't occurred to me. I'd been focused on my own need for recognition, my own fight for respect. But perhaps there was a larger purpose being served, showing others, particularly women, that it was never too late to claim their rightful place. That thought stayed with me in the days that followed, influencing how I approached the transition. I became more intentional about mentoring female employees, about ensuring their contributions were recognized and valued. I made a point of publicly acknowledging the work of those who, like me, had too often been overlooked. Meanwhile, my personal life remained in limbo. Marco and I communicated only when necessary, usually about practical matters related to the acquisition. He had moved to our lake house, giving me space to return to our home if I wished, but I remained at the hotel, needing the neutral territory as I navigated this new phase of my life. Sophia and Anthony drifted between us, trying to maintain relationships with both parents while respecting the boundaries I'd established. It was awkward and painful, but also necessary. They needed to understand that the dynamics of our family had fundamentally changed, that I was no longer the mother and wife who would sacrifice her own needs to keep peace. "Do you think you and Dad will ever reconcile?" Sophia asked during a lunch we shared about 3 weeks after the board vote. Her expression was hopeful but guarded, as if she already knew the answer, but needed to hear it from me. I considered the question carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's not just about forgiving his actions, though that's part of it. It's about whether we can build a new relationship based on genuine equality and respect. And that would require changes from both of us, changes I'm not sure your father is capable of making." She nodded slowly. "He's struggling. I've never seen him like this, uncertain, almost lost. It's like he doesn't know who he is without the company, without you by his side in the way you've always been." "Perhaps that's necessary," I suggested, gently. Maybe he needs to rediscover himself, just as I've had to do, to figure out who Marco Moretti really is when he's not being propped up by others' work and sacrifice. That sounds harsh, Sophia said, wincing slightly. It's honest, I replied, and honesty is what we all need right now, even when it's uncomfortable. As the acquisition neared completion, Lawrence suggested a company-wide gathering to announce the transition formally and introduce key Pinnacle executives to the Moretti team. It was a sensible idea, a way to ease anxieties and set a positive tone for the future. But it also presented a dilemma. How would Marco and I present ourselves in such a public setting? He'll need to be there, Lawrence pointed out during our planning meeting. As co-founder, his presence is important for continuity, but given the circumstances. We're professionals, I assured him. We can set aside our personal issues for the sake of the company. I wasn't entirely certain this was true, but I was determined to make it so. This event would be watched closely by employees, clients, and the industry as a whole. It needed to reflect the positive aspects of the acquisition, not the complicated personal dynamics that had led to it. The day before the announcement, I finally reached out to Marco directly, suggesting we meet to coordinate our approach to the event. He agreed immediately, perhaps seeing it as an opening for a broader conversation. We met at a small cafe halfway, between our home and my hotel, neutral ground for what promised to be a difficult discussion. Marco arrived first, and I was struck by how much he had aged in just a few weeks. The confident, somewhat arrogant man who had dominated our business for decades seemed diminished somehow, his customary energy replaced by a wary guardedness. "Thank you for meeting me," I said as I took my seat across from him. He nodded, studying me with an intensity that might once have made me uncomfortable. "You look well," he observed. "Better than well, actually. There's something different about you." "I feel different," I admitted. Clearer, more certain of myself and what I want. A flicker of something, regret, admiration, crossed his face. "And what is it that you want, Elena? Beyond the business deal, beyond proving your point, what do you really want?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for weeks, one that went beyond the immediate circumstances of the acquisition or even our marriage. What did I want for the next chapter of my life? "I want to be valued for who I am and what I contribute," I said after a moment's reflection. "Not just acknowledged when it's convenient or when I demand it, but truly seen and respected. I want to use my experience and knowledge to mentor others, especially women who might otherwise be overlooked. And I want relationships, personal and professional, that are based on genuine partnership, not convenience or habit." Marco was silent for a long moment, absorbing my words. "And is there room in that vision for me? For us?" I met his gaze directly. "I don't know. That depends on whether you can truly understand why I had to take this stand. Whether you're capable of seeing me as an equal, not just saying the words when it suits you." He sighed, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "I've had a lot of time to think these past weeks, about the company, about our marriage, about the way I've operated for so long." He paused, seeming to struggle with what came next. "I didn't see it, Elena. I didn't see how I was diminishing you, taking credit for your ideas, pushing you into the background. It wasn't conscious, but that doesn't make it any less real." It was the first time he'd acknowledged his behavior, without deflection or justification, and I felt a small knot of tension within me loosen slightly. "The board meeting was a wake-up call," he continued. "Watching everyone, even our children, side with you, hearing how they viewed my actions. It forced me to see myself through their eyes, through your eyes. And I didn't like what I saw." "Recognition is the first step," I said cautiously. "But it's only a beginning." He nodded. "I know. And I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. Not yet. I haven't earned that. I'm just asking for a chance to show that I can change, that I can learn to be the partner you deserve." His words were the right ones, but I'd heard promises from Marco before. Actions, not words, would determine whether any kind of future together was possible. "Let's focus on tomorrow's announcement," I suggested, steering us back to the immediate task. "We need to present a united front for the sake of our employees, to reassure them about the transition." He accepted the redirection with a nod. "What do you suggest?" "Honesty, to a point," I replied. "We acknowledge that the decision to sell wasn't initially mutual, but emphasize that the terms benefit everyone. We focus on the future, on the opportunities the partnership with Pinnacle creates." "And us? How do we address our situation?" "We don't," I said firmly. "Our personal relationship isn't relevant to the business announcement. We appear professional, cordial, focused on the company's best interests." He agreed, and we spent the next hour planning our remarks, dividing responsibilities, and establishing boundaries for the event. By the time we parted, there was a tentative ease between us. Not forgiveness or reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of a new understanding. The announcement event was held in our flagship showroom, transformed for the occasion with elegant floral arrangements and catering stations. Employees from all departments mingled nervously, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, as they awaited official confirmation of the changes they'd been hearing about for weeks. Lawrence arrived with his executive team, all of them making a point to interact warmly with Moretti staff, emphasizing continuity and collaboration rather than conquest. It was skillfully done, and I found myself appreciating Lawrence's sensitivity to the emotional aspects of the transition. At precisely 2:00, Lawrence, Marco, and I took our places at the front of the room. The murmur of conversation died away as employees gathered around, their attention focused intently on us. Lawrence spoke first, his tone warm and respectful, as he outlined the acquisition in broad strokes, emphasizing the complementary strengths of both companies and his commitment to preserving what made Moretti special. He spoke of partnership rather than absorption, of growth rather than change. Then it was Marco's turn. I watched him carefully as he stepped forward, curious to see which version of my husband would appear. The confident, sometimes domineering businessman I'd known for decades, or the more reflective man I'd glimpsed at our recent meeting. "For 25 years, he began, his voice steady but less forceful than usual, "Moretti Fine Furnishings has been my life's work, my passion, my greatest achievement." He paused, glancing at me. "Or rather, it has been our greatest achievement. Elena and I built this company together, from a small workshop to what you see today. That journey wasn't always easy, but it was always worthwhile." A murmur ran through the crowd at his deliberate inclusion of me, something he had often neglected in past speeches. "The decision to join forces with Pinnacle wasn't an easy one," he continued. "In fact, I initially resisted it. But Elena—" Another glance my way, this one filled with something that might have been respect, saw the opportunity more clearly than I did. She negotiated terms that protect what matters most: our employees, our craftsmanship, our legacy. And for that, I am grateful. The acknowledgement was unexpected, and I felt a ripple of surprise move through me. This wasn't the defensive posturing I'd anticipated, but something more genuine, a public recognition of my role that Marco had rarely offered before. "Change is never easy," he concluded. "But sometimes it's necessary for growth. I believe this partnership with Pinnacle represents not an ending, but a new beginning for everything we've built together. And I ask all of you to embrace it with the same dedication and excellence you've always shown." As applause filled the room, Marco stepped back, and it was my turn to address the gathering. I moved to the center, conscious of all eyes upon me, aware that for many of our employees, this was the first time they'd seen me take such a prominent role. 25 years ago, I began, echoing Marco's opening, Marco and I had a vision for a company that would blend traditional craftsmanship with innovative design. We started with just the two of us in a tiny workshop, taking risks, making mistakes, learning together. Today, looking at all of you, I see that vision realized beyond anything we could have imagined. I paused, looking around the room at the faces that had become so familiar over the years. The skilled artisans, the dedicated salespeople, the creative designers who had helped build Moretti into what it was today. This partnership with Pinnacle represents an evolution of that original vision. It allows us to reach new markets, to access resources we never had before, to grow in ways that would have been impossible on our own. But what won't change is our commitment to quality, to integrity, to the values that have always defined Moretti. I glanced at Marco, acknowledging his presence, his contribution. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the greatest growth, professionally and personally. I believe this is one of those moments, and I'm excited to see where this new chapter takes us together. The applause was warm and sustained, and as I stepped back to join Marco and Lawrence, I caught sight of Sophia and Anthony watching from the side of the room, their expressions a mixture of pride and lingering concern. They had supported my decision when it mattered most, and that bond would help us navigate whatever came next for our family. The rest of the event passed in a blur of conversations, questions, and reassurances. I moved through the room, speaking with employees at all levels, addressing concerns, celebrating achievements, building bridges to the future we were creating together. It was exhausting, but exhilarating, and I realized how much I had limited myself over the years by staying in the background, by allowing Marco to be the public face of our company. As the gathering began to wind down, Lawrence approached me, a glass of champagne in hand. "Remarkable," he said, gesturing toward the room where employees and Pinnacle executives were now mingling comfortably. "I've overseen a dozen acquisitions, and I've never seen one accepted so positively, so quickly." I smiled, taking a sip from my own glass. It helps when people feel their futures are secure, when they believe in the vision being presented. "True," he agreed. "But I think it's more than that. They trust you, Elena. They see how you've handled this transition, with strength, but also with compassion, and it gives them confidence." His observation resonated with what Vanessa had said about my changed presence, about how others were responding to the more assertive version of myself that had emerged in recent weeks. "I've spent too many years letting others speak for me," I told him. "Not anymore." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, I for one am glad to be working with this version of Elena Moretti. The board position is yours whenever you're ready to step into it." As Lawrence moved away to speak with other guests, I found myself momentarily alone, watching the scene before me with a sense of satisfaction and possibility. The company would be in good hands, the employees would be protected, and I would have a new platform from which to make my voice heard, my expertise valued. "It went well, I think," Marco said, appearing at my side. He looked tired, but more at peace than I'd seen him since the acquisition was announced. "Better than I expected." "People are resilient," I replied. "They adapt when given honest information and clear direction." He nodded, his gaze fixed. "On the crowd rather than on me." "You were impressive today. Actually, you've been impressive throughout this entire process. I just wish—" "What?" I prompted when he trailed off. He turned to face me then, his expression open and vulnerable in a way I rarely saw. "I wish I had recognized your strength, your vision, years ago. I wish I hadn't needed to lose everything to see what was right in front of me all along." It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, perhaps ever, and while it didn't erase the hurt or repair the broken trust between us, it was a beginning, an acknowledgement of the truth that would have to precede any possible reconciliation. "It's not too late to learn, Marco," I said quietly. "Not to save the company, That chapter is closing, but perhaps for other things, other possibilities. Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly tempered by realism. "One day at a time," he said. "That's all I can promise right now." "One day at a time," I agreed. It was enough for now, this moment of honest communication, this acknowledgement of what had been lost and what might, with time and effort, be rebuilt. As the event concluded and guests began to depart, I found myself standing alone in the center of the showroom, surrounded by the furniture that represented decades of creative vision and hard work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to define myself on my own terms. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, that uncertainty felt exhilarating rather than frightening. I had taken control of my narrative. I had demanded the respect I deserved, and in doing so, I had discovered a strength within myself that had been there all along, waiting for the moment when I would finally claim it. Whatever came next, with the company, with Marco, with my own evolving identity, I would face it not as someone's wife or silent partner, but as Elena Moretti, a woman who had finally learned the power of her own voice. 6 months after the acquisition, I stood at the window of my new office, watching the city below come to life in the early morning light. The Pinnacle headquarters occupied the top floors of a sleek glass tower downtown, a far cry from the converted warehouse, where Moretti Fine Furnishings had made its home. My office, with its stunning panoramic views and elegant modern furnishings, reflected my new position as Executive Vice President of Design and Heritage, a role created specifically for me in the merged company. The transition had been smoother than anyone anticipated. Lawrence had proven true to his word, maintaining the Moretti brand identity and craftsmanship standards while strategically expanding our market reach. Our sales had increased by 22% in just the first quarter under the new structure, vindicating my decision in ways even I hadn't expected. My desk phone buzzed, and my new assistant's voice came through the speaker. "Ms. Moretti, your 9 o'clock is here. Should I send them in?" "Yes, thank you, Jessica," I replied, turning from the window and smoothing my blazer, a deep burgundy that I'd chosen deliberately for today's meeting. The door opened to reveal a group of young women, all recent design school graduates, selected for Pinnacle's new mentorship program, an initiative I had proposed and championed during my first month on the executive board. They entered hesitantly, clearly intimidated by both the setting and my presence. "Good morning," I greeted them warmly, gesturing toward the seating area where coffee and pastries had been arranged. "Please, make yourselves comfortable. This isn't a formal interview. It's a conversation." As they settled in, I studied their faces, eager, nervous, hopeful. I saw reflections of my younger self in each of them and remembered how it felt to be at the beginning of a career, full of creative ideas, but uncertain how to navigate the business world that would either nurture or extinguish that creativity. "You're probably wondering why I wanted to meet with you personally," I began, taking a seat across from them. "The truth is, 25 years ago, I was sitting where you are now, full of ambition and talent, but lacking mentors who understood the unique challenges women face in this industry." I paused, remembering those early days when Marco and I were just starting out, when my ideas were still heard and valued equally to his, before the gradual erosion of my voice began. "This mentorship program isn't just about teaching you design, principles, or business strategies," I continued. "It's about ensuring that your voices are heard, that your contributions are recognized, that you never have to choose between your creative vision and your professional authority." One of the women, Zara, leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Moretti, if I may ask, is it true that you negotiated the entire Moretti acquisition yourself after discovering your husband was planning to sell without your knowledge?" I smiled, unsurprised by the question. The story had become something of a legend within the industry, despite my efforts to keep the personal details private. "The circumstances were more complex than the rumors suggest," I replied diplomatically. "But yes, When I realized decisions were being made that affected my company without my input, I took control of the situation. And that's precisely the lesson I hope all of you will take to heart. Never allow yourself to be sidelined from decisions that affect your work, your vision, or your future. For the next hour, we talked openly about their aspirations, their concerns, and the roadblocks they anticipated. I shared stories from my own journey, not just the recent triumph of the acquisition, but the smaller battles fought over decades, having designs attributed to Marco rather than to me, being introduced as Marco's wife at industry events where I was the actual honoree, watching my contributions gradually fade into the background of our company's narrative. The hardest part, I told them, wasn't the blatant sexism from competitors or clients. It was the subtle erosion within my own company, my own marriage, the way my role was diminished so gradually that I barely noticed it happening until it was almost too late. How did you find the courage to stand up for yourself? Asked May, the quietest of the group, her voice barely audible. The question gave me pause. How had I found that courage after decades of accommodation and compromise? It wasn't a single moment of bravery, I answered thoughtfully. It was the slow realization that by accepting less than I deserved, I was not only harming myself, but setting a standard for others, including my daughter, including women like you. Sometimes courage isn't about fearlessness. It's about recognizing that the cost of remaining silent has finally become too high. As our meeting concluded and the women prepared to leave, each a little straighter in posture, a little more confident in expression than when they'd arrived, Zara lingered behind. "Ms. Moretti," she said once we were alone, "I just wanted to say, you're the reason I applied to this program. When I read about what you did, how you refused to be pushed aside, it made me believe I could succeed in this industry without compromising who I am." Her words touched me deeply, reminding me that our actions create ripples we might never fully see or understand. In standing up for myself, I had unknowingly become a beacon for others. "Thank you for telling me that," I replied sincerely. "Remember, your voice matters. Your vision matters. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." After she left, I returned to my desk, reflecting on how much had changed in 6 months. The mentorship program was just one of several initiatives I'd launched since joining Pinnacle's executive team. I'd also established a design innovation lab that gave equal opportunities to talented craftspeople regardless of gender or background, and created a transparent attribution system that ensured all contributors to a design were properly credited. These changes weren't just symbolic gestures. They were transforming the company culture in measurable ways. Employee satisfaction scores had increased, particularly among women and minorities. Retention rates had improved, and most significantly, the caliber of new design concepts coming through our pipeline had never been stronger. My phone buzzed again, and Jessica's voice came through. "Ms. Moretti, Mr. Barnes would like to see you when you have a moment." "Thank you. Tell him I'll be there shortly," I replied, gathering the notes from my mentorship meeting. Lawrence had proven to be everything I'd hoped for in a business partner: respectful, transparent, and genuinely committed to the values I'd fought to preserve. Our working relationship had evolved into a friendship based on mutual respect, something I'd once thought impossible with someone who had been our chief competitor. His office was larger than mine, but similarly appointed, with one key difference, where my space featured several pieces from Moretti's signature collections. His showcased a more eclectic mix, including several prototypes from our new collaborative line. "Elena," he greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk. "How did the mentorship meeting go?" "Better than expected," I replied, taking a seat across from him. "These young women are talented and hungry for guidance. I think several of them have real potential." He nodded, pleased. "That program was one of your best ideas. The fresh perspective they're bringing is exactly what we needed." He paused, studying me for a moment. You seem to have found your stride here. The board is impressed, not just with the financial results, but with the cultural shift you're creating. It's been surprisingly liberating, I admitted. To be valued purely for my ideas and expertise, without the complicating factors of family dynamics. Speaking of family, Lawrence said carefully, have you given any more thought to my suggestion about the anniversary event? 30 years of Moretti craftsmanship deserves celebration, especially now that we've successfully integrated the brands. The suggestion had been made several weeks earlier, a gala event to mark the 30th anniversary of Moretti Fine Furnishings, celebrating its heritage while looking toward its future as part of Pinnacle. It was a lovely idea in theory, but in practice, it would mean facing Marco in a public setting for the first time since the acquisition was completed. Our interactions since then had been minimal and strictly business-related. He had stayed on as a consultant during the transition period, but had maintained his distance, working primarily from home or from the original workshop, which had been preserved as a specialty custom studio. Our personal relationship remained, in limbo, not quite separated, not quite reconciled, existing in a strange gray area that neither of us seemed ready to resolve. I've thought about it, I said slowly, and I agree that the anniversary should be acknowledged. But I'm not sure a gala is the right approach. Something more intimate, focused on the craftsmanship and the artisans who've been with us from the beginning. That feels more authentic to the Moretti spirit. Lawrence smiled, unsurprised by my response. I had a feeling you'd say that. And I agree. Authenticity should be our guiding principle. He reached for a folder on his desk. That's why I had the events team draft 2 different concepts. The first is the standard corporate gala. The second is more along the lines of what you're suggesting. A workshop open house, demonstrations by master craftspeople, a curated exhibition of our evolution over 30 years. He handed me the folder, and as I flipped through the second concept, I felt a surge of appreciation for his understanding. This was exactly the kind of celebration I would have created myself, focused on the work, the craft, the legacy, rather than on corporate networking or self-congratulation. This is perfect, I said, looking up from the plans. It honors what Moretti has always been about, the marriage of artistry and functionality, the respect for materials and techniques. I thought you'd approve, Lawrence replied. There's just one thing. It would be meaningful to have both founders present. Do you think Marco would participate? The question hung in the air between us. Lawrence was aware of the complicated dynamics between Marco and me, though he'd been respectful, enough not to pry into the personal aspects of our estrangement. I believe he would, I said after a moment's consideration. Whatever our personal situation, Marco loves the company as much as I do. He'd want to be part of honoring its legacy. Excellent. Then shall we proceed with the planning? The original anniversary date is just 2 months away. I nodded, already envisioning how the event could come together. Yes, let's do it. And I'd like to be directly involved in the curation of the exhibition. There are pieces and stories that need to be included to truly represent our journey. Of course, Lawrence agreed readily. It's your legacy we're celebrating. You should shape how it's presented. As I left his office, I felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The anniversary celebration was a wonderful opportunity to honor what Moretti had achieved over 3 decades. But it would also inevitably bring Marco and me together in a context that would stir memories and emotions we'd both been carefully avoiding. Over the next several weeks, I threw myself into the anniversary preparations, working closely with the events team to create an experience that would be meaningful for everyone connected to Moretti, from longtime employees to loyal clients, to the artisans who had helped define our aesthetic. I selected pieces from every era of our company's evolution, each one representing a milestone or breakthrough in our design philosophy. There was the first dining table Marco and I had created together, with its subtle balance of classic lines and modern proportions. The award-winning chair collection that had put us on the map nationally. The innovative storage system that had become our bestseller and launched us into international markets. Each piece told part of our story, and as I wrote the descriptions that would accompany them in the exhibition, I found myself being scrupulously fair about attributing designs, acknowledging Marco's contributions as clearly as my own, recognizing the collaborative nature of our best work. It was a kind of reckoning with our shared history, an honest assessment of what we had built together before things had begun to fracture. And in that process, I found myself remembering not just the frustrations and disappointments of recent years, but the excitement and shared purpose of our beginning. The way we had once functioned as true partners, complementing each other's strengths, building something neither of us could have created alone. 2 weeks before the event, I finally reached out to Marco directly, arranging to meet him at our original workshop where he had been spending most of his time. It felt important to have this conversation on neutral ground that held meaning for both of us. The workshop looked much as it always had. The scent of wood and varnish, the organized chaos of tools and materials, the warm light filtering through high windows. Marco was at his drafting table when I arrived, sketching something with the focused intensity I remembered so well from our early days together. He looked up as I approached, surprise and something softer flickering across his face. "Elena, this is unexpected." "I should have called first," I said, suddenly uncertain about the impulse that had brought me here. "No, it's fine," he assured me, setting aside his pencil and standing. "I was just working on some ideas for a new chair design. Nothing that can't wait." There was an awkward moment as we stood facing each other, neither quite sure how to navigate this interaction after months of distance. In the end, it was Marco who broke the silence. "You look well," he said simply. "The new role suits you." "It does," I agreed. "More than I expected, actually. And you? How are you finding the consultant position?" He shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's strange not having final say anymore. But there's a certain freedom in it, too. More time to focus on design, less on management. In some ways, it's like going back to the beginning." The observation struck me as unexpectedly perceptive. Marco had always been most alive, most authentic when he was creating rather than administrating. Perhaps this forced step back from leadership had reconnected him with what he truly loved about our business. "That's partly why I'm here," I said, moving to the purpose of my visit. "Lawrence and I are planning an event to celebrate Moretti's 30th anniversary. Not a corporate gala, but something more meaningful. An open house here at the original. Workshop, demonstrations, an exhibition of our most significant pieces over the years." Interest sparked in his eyes. "That sounds more like us than some stuffy hotel ballroom affair." "My thoughts exactly," I said, pleased by his immediate understanding. "And it wouldn't be authentic without both founders present. I'd like you to be part of it, Marco. To help select the pieces that represent your vision. To speak about the craftsmanship philosophy that's always guided us." He studied me for a moment, perhaps looking for hidden motives or conditions in my invitation. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "I'd like that. This milestone belongs to both of us, whatever else has changed." Relief washed through me. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been about his potential refusal. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that. The events team will need to coordinate with you on the specifics, but I wanted to ask you personally." "I appreciate that," he said quietly. Then, after a brief hesitation, "Would you like to see what I've been working on? Some of it might be worth including in the exhibition, a glimpse of where Moretti craftsmanship is heading next." The invitation felt significant, an olive branch perhaps, or at least an acknowledgement that despite everything, our shared passion for design remained a connection between us. I nodded, genuinely curious about what he'd been creating in these months of relative solitude. It wasn't about winning or losing, about punishment or revenge. It was about truth, about respect, about claiming the place I had earned through decades of contribution and creativity. And having claimed that place, I could now move forward, not defined by past hurts, but empowered by the understanding they had brought. Whatever the future held, for the company, for my family, for my relationship with Marco, I would face it not as someone's wife or silent partner, but as Elena Moretti, co-founder, creator, visionary in her own right. The woman who had finally learned that her voice wasn't just worth hearing, it was essential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.